That's some crazy stuff. They travel these little.
Everyone, we'll get started shortly. We're just letting people have a chance to filter into the room. All right, and while everyone's filtering in, just a little housekeeping. We are in a Zoom webinar room tonight. So those of you in the audience, we won't see you or hear you, but we do encourage you to put any questions that you have in the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. If you shake your mouse, you'll see that little speech bubble there. That's where you can enter any questions you may have. I'm Erin Driscoll. I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Wilmington Memorial Library in Wilmington, Massachusetts. I want to thank our neighboring libraries in Chelmsford, North Reading, and Tewksbury for helping us to promote this program. And I'm very excited to introduce our presenters, Kent Garrett and Jeanne Ellsworth, authors of the book, The Last Negroes at Harvard, the class of 1963, and the 18 young men who changed Harvard forever. Kent Garrett graduated from Harvard in 1963. He was one of the producers on the groundbreaking public TV program, Black Journal, and had a 30-year Emmy and Peabody Award-winning career at CBS and NBC News. He has also worked as an organic dairy farmer and as the news director at a television station in Binghamton, New York. He currently hosts and produces a daily morning news podcast in Roxbury on WIOX 91.3 FM. Jeanne Ellsworth grew up in rural New Jersey and taught elementary school there for 10 years. She earned a PhD in the Social Foundations of Education from the University of Buffalo and was an educator in the State University of New York system for 20 years. She has taught art to second graders, science to sixth graders, math to incarcerated men, English to recent immigrants, and to women in China, and various education courses to aspiring teachers. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters, and I'll share the PowerPoint presentation.
Well, thank you so much for having us. I'm Kent Garrett. This is Jeanne Ellsworth sitting next to me here. And we begin with the first slide, which will be a cover of the book. And that's the book. It came out in February 12th of 2020. It was right before the COVID epidemic started, and we didn't get to tour with the book very much, but we did a little bit. And we were 18 Negroes, as we were called back then, and one woman named Connie McDougall in the class of 1963. We went in 59, and there were about 1150 people in our class, and I was indeed a very unusual candidate or student to come to Harvard at that time, and I will tell you more about it as I go through my life.
Next slide.
And I was born, these are my parents, they were born in South Carolina. They migrated, part of the Great Migration, back to up north. They came to New York in about 1939, 1940, and I was born in 42.
Next slide.
I grew up in the Fort Greene projects in Brooklyn, New York, and there I am at age, I think about 5 years old or so. The projects were pretty rough, in a rough section of Brooklyn, and they were pretty rough themselves. A lot of crime and a lot of gang activity. And our parents, I have a sister who is 4 years younger, and our parents kept us out of the streets, and were pretty protective when we were growing up.
Next slide.
And summertimes I spent summers in South Carolina, where my grandfather had a cotton farm, and he had a beef farm as well. And that's me on the mule Emma. I was in charge of the horses and the hogs down there. We would travel by train, and it was one of the early times when I first discerned about segregation and desegregation. We would take a train called the Silver Meter down to Washington, and then Washington we'd have to change to the colored train and to proceed with the rest of the trip.
Next slide.
And I went to Boys High School, which is in Brooklyn, which is up on the left, and it's in Bedford-Stuyvesant. I was there from 56 to 59. I was in a special program in the city and was able to skip 1 year of a junior high school. So I did the 7th, 8th, and 9th grades in 2 years, and then went on to Boys High, where I applied to Harvard and came up to Harvard in 1959, September of 59. And for me, it was kind of like landing on the moon, in the sense that it was a whole different culture, different food, different people. And I'd not been out of Brooklyn, out of the city very much at all.
Next slide.
After Harvard, and we'll get back to Harvard in a minute, but after Harvard, I went to NYU Medical School for a year. I didn't really know what to do when I graduated, but took a bunch of science courses the last year and went to NYU. Didn't really like it very much, was not cut out to be a doctor. And then after that, I got into advertising, where I became an account executive at a company called Ted Bates, and I was responsible for the Anison account. And I was in it as a business person, but responsible for doing a lot of commercials, and spent a lot of time on movie sets, and got very interested in making commercials, and went to another agency and became a television advertising producer.
Next slide.
After that, I became a producer on Black Journal, which was part of NET, National Educational Television. It was the first network Black show in the entire country, and I was there for several years. And here in this picture, we're on the streets of Harlem doing a production, and I'm on the right there with the glasses on.
And the hair.
And I have hair, yeah, at that time. And there I did a piece, two big pieces called, one is the Black GI, and I traveled to Vietnam and covered the war in '69, and did a piece in Ethiopia, and then another piece on the a black cop, and they're all in the in the Smithsonian Museum right now, and have been restored.
Next slide.
After that, my life sort of came out in periods of 10 years. After Black Journal, I went to CBS News with Dan Rather for 10 years, started out there on a program called CBS Reports, and did about 3-4 documentaries with a guy named Ed Bradley and Marlene Sanders. And then after 10 years there, I went to 10 years at NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw. And I was based in New York. And after a while, it was a question of a lot of office politics, and the news was changing in terms of becoming more kind of marketing oriented. And I was didn't like it very much, and decided to move upstate and start a dairy farm. And I became one of the first organic dairy farmers in Delaware County, upstate New York, about 150 miles from New York City.
Next slide.
Now, and then these are the 18 plus 1 members of my class of 63.
But you left out the part where I usually come in and say, and that's where I came in.
Oh, right.
Kent decided to leave farming. It was getting hard on the body. It's tough, hard work. And he got this idea, first of all, to look up his classmates from class of 63. And at the same time, he and I met internet on, a dating website. And on our first date, he told me about this idea he had. And my background in grad school was the history of education in the United States. So as I like to joke, when I left that first date, I didn't know if we would have a second date, but I knew he had a great project. And maybe that's why we did have a second date, and the rest is history. So we started going around trying to find these people. Some of it was easy, some of it took a very long time.
And this is us, we're all 80 years old now. So it's really, this is when we were definitely much younger. But so we decided to, and actually 7 of us, 7 have died already. And
4 had died when we started the project.
Right, 4,
3
three since then.
Yeah.
And the book was a long project. I mean, we first thought that it would just be a sense of what my classmates had done and what they had accomplished in life. But we felt we had more than that in the project. And we wanted to really find out how we fit into the whole civil rights movement and the whole arc of history. So we decided to interview everyone and to do the book. But in the book, there were some surprises, as always sort of happens. I mean, the first one was that we
Next slide.
we had made an error in terms of there's one before that, one back.
There we go.
One before that, and that I had determined that there were 17 Black guys or Negroes in our class. I knew 4 or 5, but some of them I didn't know. And I went through a little book where they had a little black and white sort of passport picture of everybody and came up with the number 17. And then we got a call saying that we got an email saying that there's more than 17. There were 18 or 19. And that sort of was very startling. And it turned out that this email said that there were 2 other Blacks in our class. And I, being the intrepid reporter, decided I'd have to just call up people and ask them if they were Negro or Black, which I did. And based on what this email had said and what the pictures look like. And, it's a very awkward conversation saying, at the end of it saying, by the way, are you Black or are you white? And one guy said, no, I'm not. And then luckily I found Jerry Secundi, who was in our class and who I remembered when I talked to him. And he's lives out in Pasadena now.
Yeah, and it was a fascinating experience to talk with him. I mean, what he has to say about identity. He says that at the time he entered Harvard, he would introduce himself by saying, hi, I'm Jerry, I'm a Negro. And because none of the other Black classmates knew him as a Negro, but if they were acquainted with him at all, they hadn't had the hi, I'm a Negro experience yet.
Right.
Next slide. Another surprise, yes.
Another surprise, one of our classmates was a guy named Lowell Davidson. And he was a wonderful, wonderful piano player. And he played sort of avant-garde piano jazz. And he became a protege of Ornette Coleman, and he produced this one album, the Lowell Davidson Trio, which was Ornette Coleman helped him produce it. But the surprise was that the drummer on it was a guy named Milford Graves, who I had gone to boys' high school with in Brooklyn for about 2 years. And for every day during the school year, for 2 years, he and I would ride the bus together. And it was really surprising to see that he had been on this album with Lowell Davidson. And we went up to Bennington and interviewed him. And he was sort of teaching avant-garde drumming up there.
Next slide.
And now, what was it like there? I mean, when we came into Harvard, many of the white students had not spoken, or had never spoken to, had a serious conversation with a Black person. And there was constant questions about what's it like to be a Negro? What does it feel like? What do you think about? And indeed, we were sort of real curiosities. And there were 2 papers written about us. One was by a classmate, a guy named Ronnie Blau. It was called Bright Shadows in the Yard, the Harvard Negro freshman. And at that time, and he sort of had a paper to do. He was in David Reisman's class, who was a well-known sociologist who wrote the book, what did he write? The
Lonely Crowd.
The Lonely Crowd. But anyway, when I read this paper, 50 years later, he had kept it, and he got a great grade on it. He got an A on it. I mean, I was incensed in the sense that you really had a sense that times had changed, and the sense that bright shadows, to be called bright shadows now, would be totally insulting, and he would have done a different paper if he had done it now. But anyway, it was a paper about the 18 of us.
So I, because of my background as sort of historian scholar, I unearthed these papers. Of course, Harvard, being Harvard, keeps everything, as I guess most institutions do. And I couldn't wait to get into the archives. So I found these 2 papers, and it was quite an experience to read something that was actually written at the time. It's one thing when we would ask individuals to talk about how they felt about their fellow Black classmates, or the Black men themselves, how things happened. But I think these papers gave us a window on their feelings at the time. And in a stroke of amazing good luck, each of them quoted their interviews with the young men, and we were able to suss out the pseudonyms and see who had said what when. But I think equally disturbing, next slide if you will, was that this is one of the main books that most students who are interested in any kind of race relations at the time, in the late 50s, they would read this book, The Mark of Oppression by Candner and Ovesey. So I read it, and it was really a hair-raising experience to think that these were the ideas that so-called enlightened sociologists held at the time when these young men entered school. My favorite quote from which is, "The Negro has no possible basis for a healthy self-esteem and every incentive for self-hatred." And next slide. Interestingly enough, though, this is Ron Blau, the top picture, and he's the one that wrote Dark Shadows in the Yard. He was actually, Bright Shadows in the Yard. Yeah, he was a classmate, right. And he actually knew the guys. He interviewed them. He lived with one, right? He was Jack's roommate first year, and he actually took this scholar to task a little bit. He said they do not appear to fit the usual stereotypes of the American Negro, even those presented by sociologists. And then what happens is his professor, David Reisman, takes issue with Ron and says, well, what it is to admit to oneself a desire to be white would be a kind of betrayal, as giving one a sense of loss and futility. Because Ronnie's last question, I'll Kent tell you about the last question.
Yeah, well, yeah, his last question that he asked us all was, and again, I'm reading this, we all had answered the question, but I mean, I'm reading it now 50 years later. But he says, his last question was, what if
you were reborn?
What if you were reborn? Would you want to be reborn as a Negro or as white? And everybody said they would want to be reborn as Negro, or that they liked who they were. We liked being in our own skin, except for one who was a guy named Hobie Armstrong, who was a star football player and very practical guy. I think he had a career at IBM in really, science. He said his answer was that, well, I'd like to try it out for a year and see what happens. So he was the only one that gave a somewhat practical answer, I guess, to the question.
But this is when Ronnie reported that they all said they would rather be reborn Black. This was his answer. Well, that's because it would be a betrayal. It couldn't be a true desire to be comfortable, as you say, in your own skin. Next slide.
Here's Jack Butler. He was my roommate in college. He was, I guess, the radical, one of the more radical people in our group of 18. And we were able to talk with and have dinner with Malcolm X down at in our house where we lived, in Elliott House down on the Harvard campus. And the big thing here is that we were heretofore, Harvard had let in maybe 2 or 3, 4 Blacks per year, and everybody would sort of come in and they would do their studies and then, get the hell out of Cambridge as soon as they can, because it was really a racist, tough town, as was Boston back in those days. And to have 18, we represented a somewhat powerful group. I mean, we had a freshman year, we had a Black table, one of the first at Harvard, but still there was no Black faculty, no Black courses,
no African studies,
no African studies, nothing like that. And we were inspired by listening and talking with Malcolm X, and we ended up really feeling badly that at that point, some of our brothers and sisters in the South were getting beat up and jailed. And we decided that we wanted to do something on campus.
Next
and
slide.
decided to set up an organization that was called, we'll call it Afro, I mean, what it ended up being called. But the idea was that we just wanted to form our own club. We wanted to be recognized by Harvard, by the university. If you had that recognition, you could use Harvard buildings and facilities to hold meetings, et cetera. Plus you could recruit the incoming freshmen. But to our surprise, and what really made us angry, was that the administration said, no, you can't do that because that is a form of reverse discrimination. And we were just appalled and totally outraged by that, in the sense that Harvard, at that time, as it does now, has these things called final clubs, which are kind of elite dining and social clubs that did not allow Blacks, did not allow Jews, did not allow any kind of new money. And people were in it like the Rockefellers and Roosevelts and that sort of thing. And what the administration told us is, well, if you want to form this club, you can just don't put it in your constitution that it's a club or it's an organization for African and Afro-Americans in, in good status at Harvard and Radcliffe. So they were saying you can just sort of essentially lie about it, but, bring in whoever you want to bring in, which we refused to do. And, we didn't get certified that first year when we were there.
So that club eventually, after these guys graduated, finally did cave and left that clause out of their constitution and did form what 10 years later became a very influential power on the campus, and did a series of protests that resulted in the African American Studies department and the beginning of what we would now call affirmative action, but was actually in place when these guys applied. It was before affirmative action was invented, a distinct effort on Harvard's part to have more Black students. Next slide.
And this is Fred Easter. He was one of our classmates. He lives in Minnesota now. He was sort of the class jokester, but philosopher as well. And we knew this was sort of an experiment, and he always felt that, and a lot of others did feel that we had the sort of weight of the race, in a sense, on our shoulders, in the sense that, this was an experiment to an extent on Harvard's part to let so many Negroes or Blacks in, and we didn't want to mess up. We didn't want to mess up for the race, we didn't for our families, friends, et cetera, et cetera. But we all got through, and he, when I asked Fred what he felt about it, he felt that we were sort of pioneers, and he felt that we had been.
He used a football metaphor.
Yeah, he used the football metaphor, saying that we had carried the ball and had not fumbled. And I like to add that we did indeed carry the ball, but we also, I think we got the ball closer to the goal post or the goal line, whatever. And one of the other things about this book and the whole experience is that we've all been kind of reunited, and along with other white members in our class, and we have a podcast now called The Last Negroes at Harvard, and we once a week we invite speakers, be on the left, on the right, and athletes in to talk with us, and it's up on Apple and Spotify and all that. So it's been, that's one of the rewarding things that came out of this whole experience.
So thank you for listening, and we are happy to take questions. I think they'll go through Aaron, right?
Yes, yeah. Please, if you have any questions, enter them into that chat feature. Again, that's the speech bubble at the bottom of your screen. In reading the book, I was curious. My understanding is it had initially started as kind of a video project. When did you decide it should be a book?
Well, we decided initially it was going to be a video, and we went out shooting and taped everybody. They were spread out in about 10 different cities, and one guy was in Austria, we went there, and another guy was in St. Thomas, which was a good experience. But we were going to use it and we ended up making an 18-minute video that was kind of a teaser to use to raise more money to make a longer documentary. And we put the project away for a while. We weren't very good at raising money. And at that time, it was really difficult. So we put the project away for a couple of years and did some other things, and then decided that it might make more sense as a book, given the fact that everybody was somewhat sedentary. And, we found an agent, and it took us about a year to get a proposal together, and then another year to really write the book. And that's what happened. So altogether, I mean, I think we're about 8 or 9 years.
Oh, more than that.
Well,
You
maybe
always
10
say
years.
8 or 9. I think it was 2008 when we started.
Yeah,
and then it was
2008, yeah.
2020 when it came out.
But again, we put
We
it
did put it
aside for a
aside
while.
for a
yeah.
while to do a couple of other things, but not that long. It was an amazing long time to work on something and to see it change. I think the other thing about the video was that we ended up with these long interviews, which in the beginning we transcribed by hand. We were just going crazy with the typing. Then we began to use the service for it. And the next task was huge, which was if we had just done what we thought we were going to do, which was tell these life stories, these 18 life stories, it would have been about a 2,000-page book. And I don't think anybody would have read it. So then came the really hard part of, deciding what was it about? What, there had to be some importance or overarching themes or, it was a very hard task, but it really put us through our paces. And I think that's where we came up with this idea of things like, was it affirmative action? And the answer was, asking those kinds of questions. I see there's a question, can you see this becoming a movie?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it should be, there's one in the works, supposedly.
Well,
in
I don't know
the
about in the
sense
works,
that-
but somebody bought the rights.
Yeah, a couple, it's called Nickel.
Double Nickel.
Double Nickel Production Entertainment bought the rights. They bought the film rights and are in the process of turning it into a what they call
Like a limited series.
Yeah, limited series. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens.
And of course that raises, all the guys are talking about who's going to play me. Who will play me? Who will play you?
Yeah, I think
We would love to see that happen. They've bought the rights. Now let's see what they do with it.
yeah.
That's very exciting. Another question in the chat. Did any of the members, any of the 18 classmates participate in athletics at Harvard?
Oh, many of them did. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Hobie Armstrong was was a star running back for the football team. And Lowell Johnston was on Crew Road.
Right.
Fred
played
basketball. And
and Lowell Johnston, Lowell Davidson, the musician whom you saw, the jazz musician, he was a big star of track and field. Right. In high school and early in college before he, sort of got more involved with his life story is fascinating. He was a biochemist, a track star, and a jazz pianist, just like you do,
Wow. A lot of great questions popping up in the chat. One question was, your classmates sat at the black table in the dining hall. Could you please talk a bit about that? And one of the things that struck me reading the book was that there were a lot of differing opinions from your Black classmates on the existence of the black table.
Yeah, I mean, like, for example, Jerry felt that his feeling was that, well, he as a matter of fact, he said his parents had spent all this money to send him up to Harvard, and he was not about to not just sit with the black table and not integrate the place. And there were a fair number of people who felt that our position was to try and integrate Harvard and to sort of let these white guys know that we were up to snuff, that we were as smart as they were, et cetera, et cetera. But on the other hand, I mean, we were all in a different culture, and at the black table, there were guys who would, come in from having gone home, and you'd get a sense of what was happening in the black community, what the latest words were, what the latest records were, and that sort of thing. Because in many ways, Harvard for us was just a bubble, and we're in this little bubble, and the black table was a place where you didn't have to really, speak the King's English. You could do Ebonics or whatever kind of language you wanted to do, and people understood what you were saying. So that's how it came about.
I see there's a question about Eliot House. Can you say why you chose Eliot House?
Well, Eliot House was one of the, each first off, there were about, at that time, there were 7 houses. And they're sort of residential areas where each house has its own intramural
It's like a little school within a
football
school.
team. It has its library. It has a house master who's in charge. They give some courses there, tutors and all that. And Eliot was just, is on the Charles River. It's one of the prettiest houses, has a great tower. And we just happened to pick it. And what happened, we ended up in a suite with about 5 other guys. And it turned out that David Rockefeller was one of my roommates, and this guy, what's his name, Spencer Borden from the Borden Milk, I guess it's
Borden Milk.
Borden Milk
Right?
Company. So it was a mix of people. And,
That's for sure. You and
yeah,
David
it was a mix of
Rockefeller.
people. Yeah, and the idea of the concept at Harvard was that all of these people from diverse backgrounds mixing together would, enhance our experience and give us lifelong, good things. And so I don't know if I made David Rockefeller a better banker or whatever he's doing. And I don't know if, I'm sure he didn't make me a better filmmaker necessarily, but you never know.
Maybe. And I see another question about Connie at Radcliffe. We interviewed her twice, and for a long time we thought, oh, we can't leave her out of the book. And yet it had something had to kind of go, and we knew so little about her experience, but she was the only Black woman that entered in that year.
At Radcliffe, yeah.
At Radcliffe. Radcliffe and Harvard were quite separate at this time. And so, introducing the whole idea of another institution, in a sense, just became overwhelming.
But Connie is in our podcast group. So if you want to hear Connie, you can tune us in, and she comes on every week.
She had some interesting experiences, but we didn't, as I say, we didn't end up using them, sadly. I hope she's in the movie, though.
We have a question. Have you spoken to any recent Black graduates of Harvard?
Yeah, we had in the podcast, we had, there was a big conflict at Harvard about its use of getting rid of its fossil fuel related investments. And there was a group of young Harvard kids who came on to the podcast, and we talked to them for an hour or so about their efforts to, and actually their successful efforts to get Harvard to divest from some of the fossil things. And we had, on the podcast, we had a guy named, what's his name? Jim McCluskey on, who's the first Black quarterback at Harvard. He was in the class of '66, so we talked about football to him. And we've gone back, when did we go back?
Since the book came out, we've been back twice to talk to other groups. And we have had a chance to talk to some, much, much younger men, mostly men, and some women do. And, there's such an age gap and an experience gap. When you think of a Harvard student today, can hardly remember 9/11, 2001, let alone the 1950s, 60s. But one of the most interesting ones I thought was Kent was on a panel with the class of 1973, 10 years after his. The Black experience at Harvard changed dramatically in those 10 years. And they said it was possible to go through your daily life at Harvard and really not associate with whites at all if you didn't want to. Black floors in the dorms, organizations, Black studies, Black professors. And that was amazing. In that amount of time, so much changed. And when we go back to the campus now, which we have, not only is there one Black organization, there's all kind, the Black business majors, the Black women, African.
I mean, the Black final clubs. I mean, now they've opened that whole thing up.
Black clubs,
they made a
galore.
Yeah, right. So it's really changed.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the issue up there now is that is the whole Asian student issue, right, in terms of are they being discriminated against in terms of their numbers?
Yes. We have a question in the chat. What made the class of 1963 the last Negroes, as you have your title?
Good question.
Go ahead. You can.
Well, when we thought there were 17, the title was Black 17, but as we began to read about the times, the word Negro in the beginning, when we started to encounter it, it almost felt funny coming out of our mouths. It's antiquated. It almost doesn't feel proper. But as we immersed ourselves in those days, it began to feel much more comfortable when we were talking. We did a lot of sort of pre-writing the book in the car, driving to all these different places. And so I don't know, we had a conversation and we were like, well, you weren't the first. And then we went on to say, to consider that during the time they were at the college, the country was in the process of shifting from the word Negro to the word Black or Afro-American or African-American. And so they and their rough age mates were the last to be called Negroes. Right. And even by the time they left, they didn't choose the name for their club, the Negro Association. It was Afro and African-American, African-American and African. And so they were the last Negroes.
And we also have a question. She says, I assume there was much diversity within your 18 classmates. What were some of the differences and how did you navigate them?
Yeah, well, the 18 represented the whole spectrum of Black society in a way. There were 2 or 3 guys who came from pretty wealthy and well-educated Black families who had gone to prep schools. One guy had gone to the Taft School in Connecticut. Jerry, for example, Secundi had gone to Phillips Exeter. Was it Andover? I think it was Phillips Exeter.
Ones, yeah.
And but I mean that was
all the way to Kent was sort of on the other end.
Yeah, I mean,
really?
and people who had gone to public schools and some had gone to prep schools, and Harvard was astute enough for some of the, I guess there were about 4 or 5 from the South, and Harvard had a program where they would bring them up, brought them up the summer before, and in some cases the year before, to study at the prep school so they would be prepared for the drastic change or move to Harvard.
And people like Wesley, Wesley came from a very well-educated scholarly family and was reasonably wealthy in Washington, DC, and probably would have gotten into Harvard without any affirmative action because he was, quite an outstanding scholar. But Harvard actually did put his feelers out and look for Black students. Part of their effort was funded by an organization who got something, they got an endowment, they called it the Gamble Fund. So they were gambling that this was going to result in something good. And it was not universally approved on the admissions committee. There were those who thought it was a bad idea. But they gambled, and all of the guys finished, not all on time.
Right. No, no.
Oh, actually, one did not. One left Harvard before he graduated, and he graduated elsewhere, but he transferred out.
We have a question. They're framing it as sort of a twist on the question you answered in the sociology paper. If you had the opportunity to rematriculate during the same period at Harvard, would you want to attend then, or would you want to attend Harvard or a different university? Like if you had a chance to redo your undergrad.
Oh, I think I would still go. I mean, to me, it was really a great experience, and yeah, I think I would go again, definitely. I mean, I think one of the other things is that it was really very difficult, and there was a real split between the guys from public schools versus the prep schools, in the sense that the prep school freshmen had essentially had many of the courses that we were given that first year at Harvard, and were into that sort of method of thinking, a method of challenging, whereas the public school kids a lot of them were just, in my case anyway, a lot of it had to do with rote memory and memorizing, and you memorize the stuff and put it back on the test, and then you sort of forgot it. I mean, but so it took about a year, I'd say maybe a year from the public school kids to catch up with the prep school guys,
Right. But
and become equal.
you can't deny either that the word Harvard on your resume opens a lot of doors.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I mean, it's like, yeah. I mean,
I often have asked him, what if it were like, City University, CCNY, City University of New York? Maybe you wouldn't have gotten that job.
Well, no, but I mean, the funny thing about it is that, like a lot of the people, when I was in advertising, for example, when I was in at CBS, the guys, a lot of the people in management were from Harvard, and
Other Ivies, I guess.
and as well as at NBC.
It's networking.
And it's, I don't know if it's conscious networking, but I mean, it does give you I guess, bring your resume up to the top of the and there is something, we have stuff in common, essentially,
Sure. So in the book, you and in your presentation, you mentioned that there were a couple of, contemporaneous papers with interviews from the 50s and 60s. Was there anything that surprised you? Were there any questions that you think you would have answered differently if you were asked today?
You remember we found
right
places where people had actually answered questions one way or the other. That's a good question. I feel like that mostly what I noticed there were things like, at one point, the person we determined was Kent, talking about Jack, his roommate, and how he was sort of inspired by him to think in new ways about being Black. And, it's one thing for Kent, as I said earlier, it's one thing for Kent to look back and say, I was inspired by Jack, but to hear that at that time somebody asked him, and he said that was, it was pretty fascinating to me. And then there was one example, which it was John Woodford.
Right.
He purposely gave a stupid answer, to sort of play with the interviewer in kind of a nice way. And I don't remember the question or the answer right now, but running across it, we were like, what? And later John told us, oh, I was goofy.
Yeah, I think the question was, what did he want to do? And he said he wanted to grow
That's
up
right.
to live on welfare and all
Yes.
that sort of stuff. And
Right.
He was just sort of messing with it. But I mean, at that point, I mean, we weren't really, I mean, the race thing, and especially in the first year in
It
the
was
beginning,
calmer, wasn't it?
it was
Yeah.
calmer. It was sort of below the surface. And Ronnie had to do a paper. We had to all do a paper. I mean, he at first wanted to do a paper about us, and he wanted to do a paper on the, and he was a guy, we really liked him. He would sit at the black table with us, and he said he wanted to do a paper on the social life of the Negroes at Harvard. And we had to explain to him that despite what we've been telling him at the black table, he could only get 3 or 4 pages if he did any kind of thing like that, because we had been really, outlandish in our stories about our conquests. So,
Dating was
right.
dating was hard,
Yeah, yeah.
There were girls' colleges that didn't want, to send any blacks to the mixers, or, it was a struggle.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, it was reading the book. You talk about the sort of like books of women that the women's colleges would put out with their like pictures and their contact information, which
Unbelievable.
is so, I mean, I suppose, people have Facebook now and like that, to an extent, like it still happens, but
Precisely.
it was so specifically like, just, that was amazing to read
There's an
about.
article in the back section of their freshman yearbook that rates all the different colleges on the quality of the women.
Those were bad times.
Whoa. It was tough to read.
Well, I hope that Connie does get a part in the movie or the series. So
Yes,
'cause that experience must have been something. There's one of the commenters in the chat says, "Did you say that you talked with Malcolm X? That's incredible." Can you talk a little about meeting Malcolm X?
Yeah, well, he came. He had one of the black guys in a class ahead of us, about, I think 2 years ahead of us, was a friend of a cousin of Malcolm X when he lived in Boston.
Right.
And he was able to talk to Malcolm when he came to the college, and gave a lecture at the law school.
Now, that was one time he went to the law school. Malcolm X was there twice
Right.
during your time. The second time he came, the guy that interceded, I forget his name, who had the
Bill
cousin,
Strickland.
Strickland. He arranged for Malcolm X to do a radio interview. And Jack found out about it. Kent's roommate Jack, he says, "We got to get him to come have dinner with us."
So he had
And
dinner.
they
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he was really inspiring. I mean, total, I'd never heard any person, talk about white people that way, and have so much, power in terms of black people. And as I remember, he got into an argument with the instructor, or the professor who was sort of set it up and was kind of chaperoning everything, about Martin Luther King. And at that time, the FBI or whatever had been exposing some of the extramarital activity of Martin Luther King. And the professor got upset about Malcolm talking about that, and Malcolm talked down the professor. And the argument was so intense that they were getting ready to call Malcolm X right there from Elliott House. But somehow,
Martin Luther King. Yeah.
Yeah, Martin Luther King from Elliott House. And I think they somehow got, settled at that dinner. But that was the highlight of the of those years at Harvard.
I'd imagine. How has the book been received at Harvard? Have you gotten a sense of?
We don't really know.
I don't know officially. We haven't, but we've been, I think it's been pretty positive.
Yeah.
Mifflin says that it's been pretty good in terms of sales.
Yeah, and I think, there were times early on when we, quite frankly, talked to each other and said, what if Harvard turns out to be kind of the bad guy in this? And it didn't. I think in general, although there was certainly plenty of racism all over, I think they wanted they wanted more blacks at Harvard. It's written down. Everybody knows it now, but I doubt they would be able to object to very much. So.
We have a question in the chat. Have you invited President Obama to be on your podcast? A fellow Harvard alum.
No, we have not. No, actually, we just had a guy who had written a book about Obama, a professor from University of North Carolina. But we haven't invited Obama as such.
These guys tend to get the next, a few tiers down from Obama.
I mean, the funny thing, we did a podcast
Sorry,
today.
cat problems. Come on, Harvey.
We did a podcast today, and we were interviewing, our guest was a professor from Harvard in the sociology department who had not been born when we were around, you know.
Yeah.
So it's crazy sometimes.
Yes, indeed.
Let's see. Right. Well, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for answering all of our questions. I highly recommend The Last Negroes at Harvard. I've been listening to the audiobook, which is fantastic.
Oh,
And I've downloaded the first podcast episode, but I'm waiting to finish the book first. So thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us.
it really was a pleasure.
Evening.
Thank you so much for inviting us and for receiving us so graciously.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.